Guys, welcome back to the Round Pegs Square Holes podcast. I'm here today with Gavin J Gallagher. Gavin is an Irish property investor, entrepreneur and speaker, as well as director at Earlsfort Group, which is a corporate real estate portfolio at the East Point Business Park in Dublin, comprising of 38 buildings across more than 40 acres. Gavin has an incredible story. He's a good friend of mine. We've spoken a lot about this, especially during the pandemic. I really believe that right now, this is a very, very difficult time for a lot of people, both in the UK, Dubai, around the world. If you're a small business owner watching this, you may be going through a difficult time. Perspective is really, really helpful when you're going through a tricky time. And I think you'll find that Gavin's story gives you the very, very highs of business and the lows of business, and then the perspective on what resilience you need to get through that. So the title of this talk is Resilience Through Recession. So Gavin, awesome to have you on, mate.
Thank you. Good to be here. Thanks, Sebastian.
Do you know what? We've had so many chats. I thought I'd already interviewed you, but it's just in my spare time, I think.
It's our conversations back and forth across WhatsApp and stuff.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So anyways, it's just awesome to have you here, mate. For anyone who's obviously you've got your own podcast, which is doing really, really well in Ireland, I believe. But for anyone who doesn't really know, sorry?
It's called Behind the Facade for anyone looking.
Behind the Facade. Yeah, I was going to let you name drop that at the very end, but you can just go ahead and do that now if you like. So yeah, but for anyone who hasn't heard of you, could you just give us a little bit of background about who you are and what is it you get up to?
Well, it's like similar to what you said. I run a business park here in Dublin, and it's kind of a big business park, 40 acres, like you say, about 50 different companies. Based here in this park, like ranging from say Google to Google and Oracle are the two largest companies, and then we've got 48 other companies that are kind of spread out, ranging from smaller kind of own door offices up to kind of big ones with multiple floors in buildings and stuff like that. But over the years, I've kind of built my own stuff as well. This is a family business, and I kind of fit in with my cousins, and we work together closely on running this place. We actually built it ourselves, and we still manage it now, and it's been going for about 25 years now. So that'll put a date on my my age and stuff. That's it really. It's corporate real estate more so than residential or any of that stuff. Although I have had a hand in kind of everything over the years, starting out kind of small deals and then moving up through the chain to big stuff now. I mean, this business park is probably worth like 400 million now at this stage, after 25 years of building and kind of continually adding to it and improving it.
I mean, one of the things we spoke about before was legacy as well. So it'd be great to tap into that, because this really is a legacy business for you, isn't it? It's something that's going to be going on for generations and generations. So really, really interesting there.
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, in fact, it like the business was not started by me, and that's something that I kind of I like to point out, because it's I started my own thing and I kind of did really well for it, and then I had some struggles with it, as we'll go into today. But this business, because it's a family-led business, it was actually started by my grandfather and his brothers back in the 60s. And they had built kind of a housing empire, and they were building houses, like thousands of houses all over the country. And then, but they, as was the case back in those days, the guys lived a pretty unhealthy lifestyle, and most of them were dead before they were 60. And so it was passed down to the next generation, which was my father and then his cousins. And they worked together closely, building the thing up and stuff. And then my dad died at the age of 45, very young. I was 21, and I got kind of thrown into the role of being part of the family business.
Wow. Okay. So at 21 years old, you were then kind of thrown into this. But before that, did you have anything to do with it, or was it just sort of watching your dad and your family do it?
You know what? That's the thing that it's funny. I kind of reflect over this for a book that I'm kind of thinking about putting together at the moment. And what actually happened was I was kind of the typical kind of happy-go-lucky school kid, not a care in the world. That was about it. I didn't have any kind of interest in business. In fact, I chose not to do business as a study kind of subject in school and things like that, because I thought it was boring. And then I went on a holiday to the States with the family, and we were going to Disney World, but we stopped off in New York for a day or two. And when I landed there and arrived, I remember looking up at the skyscrapers and just being absolutely mesmerized by this place, and New York City, just the vibrancy and the energy of the place. I just immediately kind of came back home saying, I'm going to be an architect. And I went on and actually like applied myself to become an architect. And so at the time I was not an academic kid. Like I would get, 1 out of 50 spelling tests and stuff like that. Like, I mean, it was an absolute disaster. I think I had ADHD, like, and just couldn't concentrate on anything. And so it was just.
Did you start the course, the uni course?
I actually, like, it's funny how that singular focus suddenly on wanting to become an architect suddenly managed to like wash away all of that kind of problem, and became like hyper focused on becoming an architect. So got the points needed, which were like very high points. It's a difficult course to get into, but I somehow managed to pull it off and got into the course and started studying. And my dad was like super proud that I had achieved this, because he didn't go to college, and none of his brother, none of his cousins and stuff went to college. And then all of a sudden, in third year, my dad went on business. He was a businessman as well, and he was like flying around the world, kind of looking at deals here, there, and everywhere. And he went to Africa on business, and he picked up an illness there, and they basically couldn't treat it, and he died 3 months later as a result of that trip. And so I was thrown in from not having a care in the world, not giving a damn about business and all that. Suddenly, it's kind of like, right, between myself and my mother. My brother was 18, and my sister is still in school, and my sister was 14 and obviously still in school. And so it was kind of like myself and my mother trying to figure out how the business works. And, my dad was an active businessman, so we had a lot of stuff going on. And I mean, it was a bit of a disaster because we didn't have a clue. He didn't talk to us about it. He was kind of a typical Irish guy who would, keep the stuff to himself. Don't talk about it at home, because it'll only draw out questions that, maybe people don't want to be worried about and stuff. And so when he died, we found that, he was super active and projects everywhere with bank debt all over the place. And so we had to kind of like sell businesses in order to pay down and stuff. So it was a difficult sort of baptism of fire. And thankfully at the time, my dad's brother, my uncle, was sort of there, and he kind of like stepped up and sort of helped us out and stuff like that, and other relatives and stuff like that did that. But then within a couple of years, he actually was facing his own struggles unbeknownst to us, and he took his own life at the age of 44. So when that happened, there was absolutely no choice. It was me, like, basically give up the architecture and roll up the sleeves and get involved in the family business.
Wow. That's amazing, really, that you were kind of thrown into it that way. But it's also quite funny because you and me both had a similar path in that we both are university architecture dropouts.
Well, the thing is I actually, believe it or not, I wanted to drop out because I felt it was necessary. But my mother was adamant that since my dad had been so proud of me getting into architecture, that I was not allowed to drop out of it. So I actually went through. I took a year out after his death. I worked in a firm, and I kind of got some experience out in the world. And then I went back in fourth year and was absolutely, again, hyper focused, finish fourth year, finish fifth year, get out and get back into the business. And so that's what I did. So I actually have a degree in architecture.
Oh, no. Okay. Well, you're showing me up here then, because I thought you dropped out.
You brought it up.
I didn't have that hyper focus. I left. I just went traveling for about 2 years. Okay, cool. So wow. Yeah. Amazing story, really, that you were in that position and still you returned and completed the course. And then I'm assuming after that, then you then went into the family business and started growing the business, which had been through a bit of a shock with your father and your uncle leaving.
Well, actually, yeah. What happened was, in terms of the sequence, what happened was my uncle was still alive when I qualified as an architect, and so that's what kind of him being involved gave me the time off to kind of continue with my studies. So finished that, and I started working on the business. I'm basically building my own business. I was working for a large firm, but I kind of found working in a big firm difficult. I'm not really a kind of a corporate kind of a person, as you can probably see with the clothes. Even me being boxed into kind of like a suit and tie and things like that just didn't work for me at all. And so I started my own architectural firm. As soon as, within a couple of months of leaving college, I decided I'm starting my own firm. So I did that. But I had in my mind that I was going to do development of some sort or investment of some sort, because I'd always been kind of like, I liked the stock market. I used to like sort of be interested in share price movements and things like that. And then I also knew that, that there was money to be made through building and things like that. And funny enough, I've just been reflecting on it after the election result in America. I actually was a big fan of Donald Trump back in my teens, believe it or not. Okay. Like way back in the 1980s when he first kind of came on the scene. He built Trump Tower and all that. And he was only in his like 30s or something when he did that huge building. And I can remember being like hyper impressed as this young kind of impressionable teenager and saying, wow, Donald Trump, look at this guy and stuff. And of course, now it's the complete opposite. But at the time when you're like, when you're young and wet behind the ears, I thought this was an amazing kind of like I thought to myself, right, I'm going to do architecture and development and investment, and I'm going to try and have like a multidisciplined firm.
So how old are you when you set up this firm?
Around 26.
26, because there aren't. I mean, I might be wrong here, but there aren't many architect students who leave and then by the time they're 26 set up their own architectural firm, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is there was all sorts of reasons for it. Like what happened was when my uncle died a few years later, I stepped into his role. But prior to that, I had kind of plenty of time to myself to kind of do stuff. And so I was pursuing projects. I had found that I knew a few people, so I got a couple of jobs. And what I did was I was doing my own small architectural practice work, working for clients and stuff. But then I had put some savings into buying a site on the west coast of Ireland. And this site that I bought was, it was a small site of about an acre of land. And I can remember I paid 25,000 for it. And I used my own architectural skills to kind of draw 4 houses and go off, and I applied for permission for those 4 houses. And then the permission came back, and I sort of said to this local estate agent or auctioneer, I said, I'd like to go and build this now. Can you give me an idea of what price I would get for each house so I can kind of do my numbers? And he came back and he says, would you be interested in selling it, like just as it is? And I said, well, I prefer to build it because I want to be a developer. And he goes, well, I have a client who's a builder, house builder, and he would love to just buy your site from you straight. And I said, well, how much? 125.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Wow.
And what you've got to understand is at the time I was working on this small domestic house project for a client in Dublin, and I had spent the best part of a year slogging over like drawings and everything like that. And I can remember kind of thinking, geez, this is a hard slog, this architecture gig.
Yeah.
And then so a whole year of slog for, I remember it was 9,000 was the fee that I was going to get paid for this slog. And the idea in architecture is that you have multiple clients so that you get, a couple of different guys paying this fee. But at this stage, it was early at the beginning of the project, at the beginning of my business. So I didn't have many other, clients and stuff. So this was the only client I had, bringing in 9,000. I was slogging on it for a long time. And suddenly I go off, and in the space of like maybe 6 months, I make 100,000 on this land deal in the West.
So obviously that must have just impacted your mindset, right? You must have just thought, I need to stop what I'm doing and just put all of my eggs in one basket and go for it.
It was just like it was like flicking a switch. It was like, what am I doing here? Like, why am I even saying that I'm an architect? Like, just go straight into the property deals, So that's what I did, and basically piled into that. And so I started doing that. And I was really doing it kind of on a small scale because I didn't have a huge amount of money. But then when my uncle died, I stepped into his role. And so I started getting a salary from doing what I was doing for the family business. And that kind of propped me up a bit. And suddenly I was thinking, okay, I've got this little bit of extra. Then something else happened in another investment, and I got involved in the managing of that. So within, say, 2 years, I was certainly earning about 3 times the amount of money that I had been. So things were suddenly kind of moving quickly forward. And so I felt more confident doing my own thing and stuff like that by then.
Wow. Yeah, really, really interesting. So I guess at this stage, you're throwing yourself into, it's mostly commercial, right? So commercial property, all in Ireland or elsewhere as well?
Well, it was a slow start. That first little site was a residential site. And then I got into some more. And what happened was I started partnering was a good thing. There was a guy that was of my dad's generation, And the family had a little piece of land, and it was next to a site that was coming up for sale. And so there was a marriage value between my land and this land. And he came to me and said, Gavin, your dad would have been interested in this, would you like to do it with me? And I said, absolutely. And he owned a piece of land in this jigsaw as well. So we went in and we did this together. So it was me working with a guy my dad's age. And it was the first time that I had to go and borrow a load of money. And I can remember, like, prior to that, I wasn't interested in debt. I was kind of like of the view, no, I'll do it with my own resources and I won't get myself heavily in debt and stuff. And he was saying, Gavin, wake up. This is how the development world works. You borrow a lot of money, and the more you can borrow, the better. So I kind of said, oh, okay. So we bought this old house, and it was on about almost 2 acres. And it was an old period house, from say 1900 or something like that, and had a huge big garden. And what we did is we went in for planning permission for 4 big 5-bedroom kind of houses in the back garden, accessing this bit of land that I had, and right next to the land that he had. And anyway, we kind of thought to ourselves, wow, we're gonna make some good money on this. We'll probably make like $1 million between the two of us. And so we were kind of really excited at the idea of making this $1 million. But at the time, the Irish market was just on fire, and we were delayed by planning permission. There was also these rules and stuff around that neighborhood. And so we were delayed for about 2 to 3 years on the project from where we wanted to be. And whilst our borrowings and all that were clocking up, the value of the actual land in the area was going up much, much faster. And so in the end, when we actually were building this, we were looking at a profit of around 6 million now. And it was incredible, this like ramp up all of a sudden so fast. And so that happened and coincided with me doing various other, once I did that project and I was borrowing kind of, $1 million or something like that, I suddenly had confidence to do it on other areas. So I borrowed it here and I borrowed it there and I borrowed it in another place. And I had lots of borrowings going on, but I was turning every deal that I did into decent profits, and they were growing quite quickly. So of course, when you start making all this kind of money, your ego starts to kind of swell up and start to think that you can do no wrong,
Yeah. I mean, for anyone listening or watching right now, Gavin's one of those really, really humble guys, and it's really, I've really got to try and pull this, the high life out of him. When I try and get Gavin to talk about the highs, I've really got to try and pull it out of him because he's a very, very humble guy, and he won't bring it up or talk about it unless I try and pry, which I'm going to try and do now. So let's paint a picture of this. At this stage, you're getting more and more confident. You're in commercial property. You're making big money. You're realizing how good it can be. You're comparing it to being an architect, where it was just compared to what you were doing when the times were good with property. You couldn't compare it. It was just a whole different playing field, right? Now, at this stage, you'd never seen a recession before, or a cycle in the economy which took a massive downturn, right?
Well, I had seen my dad struggling through one, but the thing is that people have a short memory, and one of the reasons I started my own podcast was because a lot of people, I can see these mistakes, you can see it all over the place. It's only when you've been burned yourself you suddenly remember this kind of stuff, and you can see other people and people warn you about it. You just ignore it. It's only when you get burned yourself that you actually start to pay attention to it. And so that's exactly what happened in this case. So I had seen, when my dad died, interest rates were like 18% or something like that. So, we had a big mortgage on our home and stuff. And my mom and I, we were trying to sell assets in order to pay off the mortgage so that we didn't have to move into a smaller house. 16% to 18% interest rates. This was shortly after the currency crisis of the late 80s. And so it was there, but it was kind of becoming a distant memory. And for me, I mean, you're trying to drag these things out of me. I mean, I'll give you an example of one deal that I did, and it was astronomical. It was kind of a one-off, but I went, and there was a piece of land that I knew about that was coming up for sale, and I tried to swoop in and buy it before anyone else knew about it. And so I paid. They put it on the market at 900,000. And in the end, I think somebody else bid it against me, and I ended up paying 1.2 million for it. And I was intending getting architects on board. And in fact, I met the architects, and we were looking at what we could do now with this little piece of land. And this bank, this institution in this area came along and said, oh, we need that piece of land. And how the hell did that come up in the market and we not see it? And this new guy has it, So they approached an agent who happened to know me, and he rang me up. And I remember I was having lunch with somebody, and he goes, "Gavin, did you just buy that piece of land in this place?" And I said, yeah, I just met the architects today. And he goes, "Oh, it's your lucky day. This financial institution really wants it." And I said, "Well, look, I've been meeting architects. It's not for sale, blah, 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 boosting it up a little bit."
Tell them the answer is no. Yeah. Tell them the answer is no. I'm not taking it. Out of interest, what are they offering?
Well, the funny thing is I said, "Listen, I've got plans for this, and I'm going to make good profit on this. So, they'd need to be making me a pretty good offer for me to walk away from it." So anyway, they came back with an offer, and I sort of said, "No, it's not going to do it." And it actually was a damn good offer. But in the end, long story short, 6 weeks later, I sold that property for 3.7 million. And
wow.
Yeah, so in 6 weeks, I made a 2.5 million profit. And that was when it all went bonkers. That's when I just suddenly thought, like, I am Superman, like I can do anything. And that's when the ego started to kind of
start a golden Gavin tower.
You know what? The thing is I had been living in a modest 3-bedroom house in a nice part of Dublin, to be fair, but it was modest enough. And I had, I had kids kids actually at this stage. And so the house was feeling a bit small. And I can remember thinking to myself, wow, now with this money, like I can really spoil myself. So actually I decided to convert one of the houses that I was building, this first project that I mentioned in the back of these. And that was in a really good part of Dublin and stuff. And I ended up converting, building a basement and doing all this stuff. And it ended up a 7-bedroom place with its own wine cellar and a basement gym. And I just went crazy on this beautiful house. And I did that. And at the same time, I bought a villa in Spain, and I bought an apartment in New York City. And I did just all this kind of stuff in the space of.
This was what year was this?
This period was around from about 2005 till about 2007. In that 2-year period, everything just started to go crazy. Right. And as well as that, I started getting into the stock market, and that was like
you weren't busy enough with property. It doesn't sound like you were busy enough, to be honest, mate.
I did mention the ADHD in school, and I think it kind of came back. And I can remember like just not saying no to anything. People would come to me a project, yeah, let's do that. Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that.
Yeah.
And so
when times are good,
This is the thing, and this is the discipline that I talk about nowadays. I sort of say, patience and discipline is so critical as an investor. Yeah. But like you have to learn these painful lessons yourself to kind of suddenly go, oh yeah, he was right. And that's the problem. So what I did was I met a friend of mine, a good friend from college, and we were having lunch, or I can't remember. It was like we hung out for a couple of days anyway, and he was telling me about all the money he was making on the stock market, and he was doing a thing called CFDs, and CFDs are contracts for difference, where you kind of you borrow money to buy shares, and it's all done through this kind of a thing. And I can remember sort of seeing him. He made 40,000 profit on like a Ryanair purchase or something like that. And I can remember thinking, God, this guy, how did he make 40 grand? And so I decided, okay, I've got all this cash here. I'm gonna like go in myself and do this as well. So I went and I took 100,000 of my savings and I put it into the CFD account, and I turned that 100,000 in the space of about 6 months. I turned that into 800,000 of value. So a 700,000 profit in this, or capital gain on paper, 700,000 in the space of 6 months. And I can remember, and this is when all this other stuff was happening as well. So it was just like, my God, like I can do no wrong. So I was going down to the local Porsche dealership, specking out a 911 for myself and all. I mean, I was just thinking like, the money is that easy to make, like it just, and then suddenly around about 2006, the stock market took a bit of a wobble, and suddenly the shares that I had in those companies dropped a little bit, and then they dropped a bit more. And I can remember at the time when it was at 800 grand, I think it went to 850 at the maximum point. And I remember thinking, okay, when it gets to 1 million, I'll sell, and I'll get my shares out, I'll get my cash out, and I'll buy I'll buy the 911 Porsche and I'll have 600 grand left over, and I'll use that 600 grand to pay off the mortgage on the house in Spain or something like that. It was all this kind of like, oh yeah, I'll do this, I'll do that. There was no science to it. It was just kind of like very much on the fly. And then the price dropped suddenly, bang, it was down to 500,000. And I was thinking,
Wow.
damn, okay, I'll wait for it to go back to 850 and I'll sell. Bang, down to 400. And this is the problem when you start chasing your losses and you start getting it into your head that, oh no, it's going to go back to 800. And I chased it down, 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 down. I didn't chase it down to zero. I chased it down below zero.
Oh my God.
And I ended up having to put another 150 grand into the account just to keep the position open until I just said, like, give it up. So I lost $250,000 on that.
So what did you start from? This started.
I put 100 in. I put 100 cash in, and I ended up having to put in another 150. So I lost 250 on that adventure. Yeah.
Wow. But of course, you went through the whole roller coaster of going up to 850, then down, and then having to fix it. So
and that's the thing. And the worst thing about it is that people are, and I talk about this on my podcast a lot, people kind of get this emotional attachment to this figure, and they think to themselves, okay, I'm going to sell when it gets to this level. And they don't kind of think, why would the market go to that level? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, there's absolutely no reason why it'll reach that level out of that you've just plucked out of thin air. Yeah. And so people can be kind of irrationally exuberant or irrationally emotional about stuff and just get these kind of like fixated ideas. And that's what happened with me. And it started to happen then inside the property stuff as well. And I started to realize, things are getting a bit shaky. So I decided I wanted to kind of get out of the property market. But by that stage, I had projects that were kind of like holes in the ground. You can't sell them when they're a hole in the ground. You have to build it out. And so there was this kind of race, because I could see 2007, I could see the market was getting kind of a bit shaky. People were starting to talk about this thing subprime. And I do watch American, news networks quite a bit. So I was hearing about subprime. I remember thinking, this doesn't sound good. This sounds like it could, grow and get worse and worse. So I really started thinking, time to get out. But unfortunately, this is the problem: was once you start to realize this, other people in the market do too, and there's this sudden like stampede for the exits.
Right.
Exactly. So and then the worst thing is the same, chasing your profits down. I had this property that I wanted to sell, and a guy offered me 8.8 million for this property, and I thought, okay, I'll sell that. I'll pay. I had about 6 million of debt on it, so I'll pay off the debt, and I'll have 2.2 million, profit sitting. And what happened was he pulled out of the deal, and suddenly, like, oh geez, what am I going to do now? That 2 million has evaporated. And so I kept it out there for sale. And then prices just kept coming in lower and lower and lower until it was below the debt. And I just had to forget about that. Happened then on other stuff as well. And you suddenly realize when somebody makes you a first offer, sometimes that's the offer you just need to accept. You need to swallow it, and just accept that this is the best you're going to do. If you have this like inflated idea that no, it's worth more than that, and you hold out for that price, you'll end up going back to the guy that offered you this price, and it'll be lower again by that stage. And that's what happened on multiple properties. And so it really it became like a deck of cards basically. And then the banks started to put me under pressure. I ended up with 3 banks chasing me to repay debt and all this kind of stuff. So it became an absolute nightmare. And that's so that's what we're getting into now.
Right. So I mean, it's first of all some really good practical advice there. I think pretty much if you're noticing this downward spiral, don't get emotionally attached to a figure that you think you should get for your assets, your property, or stocks, or whatever it is. In fact, get out while you can. If that is your plan anyway, doing it sooner rather than later when everyone else has jumped on it is brilliant advice. It's advice you've given me recently as well, which I've taken. So from this situation then, where you had this massive high, you were just absolutely killing it. You were smashing a business, smashing the investments. Suddenly, not just in property but in the stock market, all over the place. Then suddenly, you're starting this really difficult downward spiral. It becomes very obvious that it's not sustainable what you were doing, and now you're in the situation where you're starting to lose pretty much everything, right? Paint me a picture of what it looked like when you hit the bottom of that, and what is the bottom of that?
Well, it's I mean, the thing is these things don't happen overnight, but it's this kind of gradual death by a thousand cuts, and it's, you get the odd awkward conversation with the bank manager, and then it culminates with some sort of demand being made, and you have to kind of do something to kind of rectify that. And it kind of went on like that. It was never one huge big immediate hit, but I can remember thinking that everything was fine. This is just a blip, and then I'd sort it all out. But there was these points when prices were dropping, and I can remember thinking to myself, geez, I can't seem to catch a break here. I can't seem to sell anything at the price I was offered, because at the top of it, I was being offered millions in profit and stuff like that. And as far as I was concerned, this was all going to be fine. I would take that profit, I'd put it against this debt, I'd take this other profit, put it against this debt, and that would sort everyone out. And the problem is that, like I said, everyone is now stampeding for the door, and the market kind of goes into this free fall, and you can do nothing about it. Like, you're just literally a passenger. And so the worst that it went, I went from having, kind of tens of millions in value to actually being 16 million below zero. Because the value of the properties fell to such an extent. They fell, I mean, in my portfolio, we had as much as 80% fall in value. It's for certain sites that weren't ready to be built.
Wow. 80% drop. And of course, your mortgages haven't changed; they're the same.
That's the thing. And when you borrow money, if you're buying an asset, usually you're trying to get the most amount of cash you can from the bank. So you go to the bank and you say, "Can I have a 60% loan, and I'll put 40% in?" But back in those days, it was far more aggressive. I was saying, "Can I get 90% loan, and I'll put 10% down?" So I had these huge loans, and all of a sudden, the value of the property has dropped way below the value of the loan, and huge drop. And so
I mean, that's just crippling, isn't it? Really, I mean, where do you go from this? When what does it feel like to be told you're 18 million euros in debt?
Yeah, it's pretty difficult, because you start to kind of realize that this is a hole that you dug for yourself, and that the problem is that it starts to emerge. The realization of how bad things are emerges whilst you're still in the market freefall. So you start to realize that you're in this trouble, but you don't see the market kind of coming to a rest and starting to rise again. You're still in the freefall. And so, I mean, I was kind of thinking to myself, okay, I'm 5 million negative. Oh shit, now I'm 8 million negative. Now I'm 10 million negative. And when it got to 16 million negative, I remember just thinking, Jesus, I may as well just declare bankruptcy. The only reason I didn't was because at the time, what actually happened was I had full control over my portfolio income. And I had, even though I technically owned 16 million more than my assets were worth, I was still, the interest rates were actually quite low. And so my income versus my expenditure on interest was a big difference, a big gap between them. So I had maybe 200,000 a year of cash coming in, more than there was interest to pay out. So I was able to live on this 200,000, and I was able to kind of keep the show on the road on this 200,000. So I was actually able to maintain, to a certain degree, my lifestyle. I wasn't buying the big ticket items anymore, but I still had my kids in expensive school and all of this kind of stuff. I started looking for a way out by moving to Dubai. Spent some time in Dubai. Then I moved to Qatar. I actually went to Africa as well for about 6 months, and I spent time in Ghana, getting involved in an office building down there. And all of this stuff was happening while I was, getting this extra cash blip. And I thought to myself, I'll use this cash flow to basically find a new project that'll sort everything out, and I'll make the millions, and I'll suddenly bounce back, and everything will be great. So that was the plan, and that's what kind of kept me motivated to kind of keep going.
So there was this hope that you had in your mind. You didn't have a solution. You looked forward, and you had this. You were constantly looking for ways in which you could solve it. There wasn't this situation where you just froze and you were like there's nothing I can do.
Well, there were times when I felt like burying my head in the sand for sure. I can remember when the stock market thing was going wrong for me. It was my birthday, and I was down at this beach club with my young daughters, and they were all playing in the water and running around and everything like that. And we were having a great day, my birthday, And I remember going back to the sun chair and taking my phone out and checking it, and there was like 6 missed calls from the guys that ran the CFD company. Yeah. And I was just like, so I rang the person back and say, hi Gavin, yeah, unfortunately the market slipped a little bit more, so you need to put 70,000 into the account today. And
that's present, isn't it?
And I just remember thinking like, I was going to curse, like, what the F, just, like, what kind of birthday present like is this? And my kids are there, and it just ruins your day. And so I remember just kind of thinking to myself, what the hell am I at? Like, why am I in all this stuff? So it was around about that time that I just said to the guy, look, clear that whole bloody lot out. Just, I'll pay you your 70 grand, but that's it. Like, I'm getting out. And so that was the first kind of capitulation moment when I kind of thought, you know what, it's not worth the grief that I'm getting. Trying to keep all the balls in the air and spinning them. I kind of compare it to spinning plates, where you have 10 plates, and just as you're kind of getting to the last one, you realize the other one is about to fall off and you have to go running back. And it was like that continuously all day, every day, late into the night. And it became overwhelming.
And I guess these spinning plates, underneath those spinning plates is your family, right? And if one of them drops, you feel that huge element of guilt. And I think there's a lot of people right now, especially during the pandemic, who got a bit of a wake-up call. And I think especially in Dubai, I think there's a lot of people out here who are living way beyond their means. I think it's an environment where people tend to do that quite a lot. There's a lot of opportunity for that. And I think when it comes to mental health, and if you look at previous recessions, mental health, especially if you're the breadwinner of the family, the man or the woman, and you're having to provide, and suddenly you lose that source of income. And if you're doing a business and you've been living the high life, and really you feel that it's somewhat your responsibility, and you're at fault for losing that, then that guilt must just feel overwhelming as well.
Yeah, it does really start to impact you. And in fact, things got far worse than that, because the strain that I was under, that was causing me to kind of go to Dubai and look for projects in Dubai. I was spending weeks abroad, working on stuff, and then flying home to spend time with the family who were still in Spain. And what I can remember just arriving home, and myself and my wife at the time, we were, just in this constant kind of bickering and rowing. And so the marriage actually fell apart as a result of that kind of recession. And whereas we had been kind of quite happy prior to that, suddenly like just the strain becomes too much, and you kind of get to the point where I just started saying, you know what, this is not a healthy environment for my children, like to sort of see their parents like at each other's throats and stuff. So I just said, I'm moving out. And it was the most difficult decision. And when you throw that into the mix, and you add to the fact that, okay, so now I'm dealing with all of this struggle, but financial struggle. Now I've actually moved out. And so I now have to support her in that house, and I have to find, additional income to pay for the rent than my new place. And so it got kind of worse, but mentally, at least I felt like I had a break from the kind of the rows and stuff like that. And went on and on like this. And I got to the point where the real crescendo of the negative sort of stuff came was I actually moved to London. And when I was in London, I was actually kind of thinking to myself, it gives me options at least for potentially declaring bankruptcy, because in London you can declare bankruptcy, or in the UK, and you have 12 months and that's it. If I'd gone back to Ireland at the time, the law was that you had to be bankrupt for 12 years. And so, you would be literally unable to do anything for 12 years. Wow. And so it was never an option to go home and go bankrupt. It was always go to the UK and, 12 months of hardship, and then you can start building again. And so I went to the UK for that reason, but I still had this buffer of cash coming in from my cash flow and stuff. So I was saying to myself, no, this is good. I'll get into, so I was constantly getting into kind of new projects, and I was earning fees, and I was kind of keeping the show on the road. And then what happened was I got a call from the bank. And the thing with the banks, the main bank that was that I had most of my debt with, usually they were switching up teams all the time. So just as soon as you got to know somebody in that team and you were starting to have a rapport with them, they'd be gone. And suddenly it'd be like, oh, I have to start again with this completely new person. And it was like this. And I went through 5 different teams. Like over every 6 months or so, there was a new team. And so you could never build a rapport. So even though I had done loads of great stuff with the last team, there was no record of that. It was just like, okay, here's a guy that's in trouble. Let's hammer the guy. So it was constantly like battling with these guys. And then suddenly they brought in this guy who was completely different. He was such a negative kind of a person and such a difficult person to deal with. And he just wrote to me on, I think it was the 12th of December, back in 2014 or 2013 or something like that. And it was 2014. And it was just that, Gavin, we are, as per the contract, we are performing a full cash sweep. And what that meant was that all of this income that was coming into my bank account and I was paying out to was no longer coming to me at all. It was going straight to the bank. So 100% of my income wiped out in one go with no warning at all. Just literally the letter was, this is happening this week, bang, that's it. So no preparation, nothing. So suddenly I'm there like, now I'm in a rented place in London. It's not cheap to live in London. And I remember kind of thinking like, holy shit, I gotta pay the rent. How am I going to afford this? Like, I've lost everything. So I was trying to kind of prop things up. I had a little bit of savings left aside, but they were running out pretty quickly. So as soon as my lease was finished in London, I moved to Ireland, and I actually had to go to my brother and say, bro, can you let me live rent-free in one of your rental properties? And he was like, yeah, sure, man, no problem. But that's how low it got that I couldn't even afford rent. I actually need my brother's support to help me. So to go from the lifestyle where I was traveling first class and, driving the nicest cars, to suddenly having to kind of get down on my knee and plead for my brother's like support, it was absolutely soul destroying. And suddenly realize like how deeply, troubled I was by this kind of situation and the feeling just of complete helplessness, and needing. So at that stage, I'd been doing my own thing for so many years. I suddenly thought to myself, geez, I have no choice but to actually look for a job. And so I went back to the family business that I had left a couple of years when things were going well. I had said, see you later, guys. I don't need the job. And I spent years living in Spain and abroad and stuff. And I went back to them and I said, is there any chance that I can get a job in here? So thankfully somebody had left and I stepped into his role and started to try to rebuild again. And so that was kind of the low point, and starting from then I started to build again.
Yeah, absolutely brutal low point. Yeah, I mean, I've just got so many things to ask on that. So, I mean, obviously, you've fully recovered from that situation, which was obviously, a massive shock from where you were to where, where you went and then where you are now. But for a lot of people watching this today, there will be people right now, guaranteed, listening to this podcast who they for instance, in the UK, had the first lockdown. They may have survived the first lockdown with their business. They've now had a second lockdown where their business had to close again, and there's just no way they think they can carry their business through. From a mindset perspective, and when we talk about resilience, what kind of comforting words of advice or support could you give, having been there and kind of done it in a very extreme way, to these people?
Well, the first thing, you've got to, obviously looking forward, you got to remember that the dark place that you're in is just a moment in time. And a lot of the time, the biggest problem that I had was kind of wondering what other people would think, as opposed to what I felt myself. I built this kind of ego around me, like, the guy with the flashy lifestyle and all of that. And that was one of the biggest problems, is that you create this problem for yourself by being so kind of showy. And one of the things I try to tell people, leaving aside that, is just, this comparison lifestyle that we all live in nowadays with Instagram and, people kind of taking photographs in front of the flashy car and all that. I mean, that is such nonsense. Like when I look at it now, I kind of think to myself, like the smartest people are the ones that just do not tie their ego up in the size of their wallet. They just completely separate the two. And that's the first thing, is to just remember it's a moment in time. You feel extreme difficulty, yes. And like, I couldn't talk about this story a couple of years ago. I was too kind of caught up in the shame of the fall. But now I realize it's actually very helpful for people. And so I kind of decided, you know what, it's not the failure that defines you. It's how you deal with the failure that defines you. It's how you get up, and it's how you show up, having gone through that failure. And that's the biggest thing, is you have to kind of get, first of all, you got to develop the resilience. You got to say to yourself, okay, this is a moment in time. Even if I declare bankruptcy, it's actually, you're shedding all this baggage. It's actually a hugely kind of a lightening of your load. Like as soon as you say, you know what, that's it. That's all behind me now. All those headaches, all that dealing with the banks and stuff, the administrator will deal with all that. So that is actually a huge benefit, because there was this, I remember thinking to myself, I cannot seem to get a break from these guys calling me up with making demands and all that. And that if I hadn't had that cash flow, I probably would have declared bankruptcy much earlier. But that kind of thing was keeping me up and allowing me to put this lifestyle thing on where, he's still doing okay. Look, he's flying all around the world. He's like going off chasing projects.
That bit of cash flow made sure you could keep up with the Joneses, keep up with your kind of...
And when I realized it, like, you're absolutely right. The thing is when I look back now, I realized that that's actually what exactly that was. What I should have been doing was I should have been cutting the lifestyle, like, before it was forced on me by the bank. I should have completely cut it right back. I should have said, you know what, who cares what people think? Get rid of the flash car, get yourself a golf, who cares about, all this kind of like showy stuff. And once you do that, you kind of like, you shed this load and you suddenly go, God, the relief. I've come out, come clean. And it's like, if you've done something wrong and you come clean, you kind of feel like, oh, thank God that's out in the open now. And so what happened with me was I kind of kept on trying to kind of keep up this persona, made things worse. And then suddenly when the bank went and pulled the plug, like I could have actually been taking that wedge of extra cash that was supporting this lifestyle. I could have kept putting that into paying off debts. And I would have been in a far better position then, because the bank would have said, the guy's knocking 200 grand a year off his debts. Like he's a pretty good candidate, like, to kind of continue to support. Instead, they were like, what, you've been living on 200 grand? Of course they were going to come down heavy on me.
Yeah, right. They were comparing it to everyone else rather than, what they were saying.
The guy's paying, 10 grand a year for each of his kids to go to school in that fancy school, and all this kind of stuff. So it was, it was really, fast forward, I kind of said to myself, okay, leaving aside that, I've shed all that baggage. I'm kind of like a new man. And how do I want to show up now as this new man? And I thought, first of all, disconnect your ego from all of that money and stuff like that. I decided that I wanted to be the fittest guy that I knew. That was the first kind of step. And so I started looking at my health and all that kind of stuff. I started thinking to myself, okay. And so started getting into running and all this kind of stuff, and early morning meditation, all these kind of like exercises that just help you realize that, this is not, and also, my marriage.
Tap into the health side of stuff. You haven't you run some like mega marathons or an Ironman or something? Is that right?
I do all sorts of challenges now. I've actually signed up for an Ironman next year, and I've done 2 half Ironman in the last couple of years. And in August I did 10,000 burpees. I did it as a charity thing, 10,000 burpees in 30 days. So an average of 333 a day. And
that's some serious thumbs you're going to get from that.
And it went on like this, but I constantly set myself these kind of challenges because I want to be the fittest version of myself. And so that was something great. Also,
this kind of push for improving your health, improving your fitness, that came at a time where you lost your power within what your ego was tied to previously, which was money and wealth and business, right? That's something I've seen quite a bit, I think, recently. if you've been running a successful business or you've been earning quite a lot, and this is what you tie your personality to, and this is what you tie your success or failure to, and you lose all that, people then try and seek power in their lives somewhere else. And I think for a lot of people that is fitness, isn't it? So you obviously have this massive push towards that to get more control, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is first of all, it was fitness. It was also like, looking back on it, I had seen my dad's health, fall away very quickly when he went on that trip to Africa. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't want to be like that. I want to be, one of these people that, in my 50s, I can be doing Ironman races and things like that. So I was completely focused on that. And then after a while, I kind of thought to myself, okay, what else can I? And I started getting into the real estate stuff. I started actually wanting to speak out there, speak more about it. So I started developing my confidence as a speaker and things like that. And all of a sudden, I was sort of saying, you know what, I can actually share this story. Like, a couple of years ago, you would have asked me a question about this and I would have completely papered over all this and tried to kind of let on like that none of it had happened to me at all. But you kind of realize that it's how you deal with the, it's like I said, it's how you deal with the failure is what kind of defines you, not the failure itself.
I can totally relate to that. A lot of what I'm talking about these days is bullying or post-traumatic growth from a near-death experience, that sort of stuff. And it's super uncomfortable to talk about. Don't like talking about it. But what makes it infinitely easier to talk about is the fact that it's not really about you. It's about the people listening and who you might be helping. And I know that from the conversations you've had with me, which I've then passed on to other people. It's not only helped me, but it's helped the people I've spoken to as well. I mean, there's people in this group right now that I've given your advice to, and they've benefited from it.
All right. Okay. That's nice.
So directly. So it's having using those difficult times and those experiences to help other people is an amazing mission, I think.
Well, that's it, and the thing is I see so many guys out there. I'm kind of I'm out in the public eye a bit more nowadays than I was in the past, and I see these other guys around me who are kind of out there doing it as well. And I see so many of them talking it up, talking up the success, and they jump onto the stage wearing the flashy kind of clothes and the watch, and there's photographs on their Instagram of them standing next to the kind of the Bentley or whatever. And I can remember kind of thinking to myself, what I'm going to go completely against that. I'm going to go and just push completely back against that and sort of say, you know what, that is all BS. You really have to kind of move your mindset. You got to become disciplined. You got to become patient. This is a slow game. The real estate investment business is a slow grow business. You should be buying property for your grandchildren. That's the way you should be looking at real estate. The stuff that I was doing, I was getting in and getting out. I was trading. And the problem with that is that you live and die by the sword when you're doing that kind of stuff. If you think about a bicycle wheel, okay, the way it works, it's constantly turning. The market is constantly turning. You will be at the top of the market at some point. Yes. You will also be at the bottom of the market at some point. And the problem is that the guys that are on the way up, and when they get to the top, well, like I did, you think to yourself, this is just it's not a wheel. You think you're on a hill that just keeps going up and up and up. Yeah. And the reality is that you get to this point, it's the pinnacle of that point in the market, and it starts to fall. And when you're going down through the fall, you will start to think to yourself, how on earth did I spend all that money? How did I waste that money? I mean, I was buying a car every year or two, you know what I mean? And I'd be getting kind of, one of the cars that I got 40,000 euros worth of extras put on it, and I got all the computers and all that kind of stuff and TV cameras and stuff. And I can remember kind of thinking to myself, yeah, I need all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And then when you sell the car, I sold it for, I think, less than a third of what I had paid for it, like a year and a half. I remember thinking, like, what a nightmare. And I think to myself now, I start looking at things from a contribution point of view and from an impact point of view. And I think to myself, I contribute to this thing called Charity Water. And I think it's a great charity where they build wells in the developing world and allow people to have fresh water. And there's a guy called Scott Harrison who started it. And it's a real sort of, it's inspirational the way they're going about it, but every penny of the money goes into building wells and helping. And for something like €30 a day, you can, basically give clean water for a week to a family or something like that in Africa or whatever, and it'll actually save lives and stuff. So I started thinking to myself, God, that money that I blew on the car, like I could easily have kept like a small village alive for a year. Like, now when you think like that, you kind of start to say, wow, don't be so shallow. Kind of start to get kind of like below. There's an Irish guy, you should Google him, called Chuck Feeney. And Dubai Airport, the airport duty free there, he was the inventor of airport duty free shopping around the world. Really? Yeah, Irish guy, and he Irish American, okay, and he created this business that was so incredibly successful that he, at the top of his wealth, he was worth 6 to 10 billion or something like that, and he decided that he wanted to give every single penny of it away while he was still alive. And so the guy, travels on the back of the plane, even though he has he had the wealth to have his own private jet, traveled down the back of the plane, always very, very modest, wouldn't have he'd take a taxi rather than a limousine, all this kind of stuff. And I mean, look, each to their own. But what's amazing about it is that he has funded universities, he's funded all sorts of things all around the world. And you never see his name on the building, like the Chuck Feeney building or anything. He just does it completely anonymously. And he has even put money into projects where other billionaires are putting money in, and they're insisting that their name is at the top. And he would go 50-50, but he'd say, no, it's fine. You can have your name at the top. And it's that I kind of think that is super cool, super confident that, you're not like, you're not in this like race, like, oh, I have to be seen, I have to be heard, I have to be the man, like that's kind of everyone's looking up to. And he just anonymously kind of gives it away. And the guy actually, in the last month or two, has achieved giving away every single penny of his wealth, and he is now broke. And he's delighted that he's achieved in his lifetime, because he's kind of nearly in his 90s now at this stage. Yeah. But he has achieved in his lifetime giving away every single penny of his wealth, and to him that is a huge success. Yeah, and the foundation he created is like winding down now.
What an incredible just mindset and
legacy. Legacy. We'll be talking about this guy in 100 years' time. Yeah. Whereas the guys with their names in the building and stuff, then the name gets like chiseled off when somebody else comes along and wants something bigger or whatever. So,
wow. Yeah, that's
a lot of questions. Will we answer some of the questions or?
Well, if there's any really good ones, we'll have a flick through in a second. There's a really good one here.
I see a couple of questions there, and I'm thinking maybe we can help some people.
What's your advice for people who are currently at the top of the cyclic market?
Well, if you're at the top, I mean, the best advice I can have is to take as much of it, basically, first of all, assume that the market could crash at any time. And so don't assume that the next project you invest in is just going to keep on going. Always build in a margin of error just in case things go wrong. It may not. You may be kind of over egging it, kind of thinking that it's going to fall. But when the market is at the bottom, that's when you get aggressive, when you get greedy, and you keep on buying and buying and buying. But as soon as you get to the top, you want to stop investing. And anything that you've got, any spare cash and stuff, try to just limit the amount that you're spending. It's very, very easy. We've got all of these cognitive biases where we think to ourselves we're disciplined, but in fact, temptation always makes you far less disciplined than you think. And so you'll easily spend money that you didn't think that you were going to spend, and you'll blow it on kind of like superfluous stuff that you don't need. And half the stuff that we buy, we didn't need. And so you kind of have to develop this mature kind of mindset where, keeping up with the Joneses. I can remember friends of mine would have a new car, and I'd be kind of like, God, he has a new car, I got to go and get a new car. And that kind of whole thing just leads to downfall. It's because as soon as he gets the new car, oh, I got to go and change my car now, and I got to keep up with this guy. And it sounds so obvious, but a lot of the time when you're doing really well, you keep on justifying why this is something that you can reward yourself. This is something you can do. This is something that you deserve. And you don't realize that, like, none of us, as I said to you back last February, none of us saw COVID coming. Like, nobody predicted COVID. But I was thinking last November, 12 months ago, I was thinking there is going to be some kind of a recession in 2020. And I thought it was going to be because of, Trump at the time was starting this kind of war with China, this trade war with China. And then I thought to myself, no, maybe it's going to be Brexit. Maybe that'll like shake the market to the point where it'll collapse. And there was all these things, but I was sure there was going to be some kind of a collapse. So I actually had cash put aside last November that, basically going into this market that whereas everyone else was kind of piling in and doing new deals and stuff, thinking, market's going to continue going. So you really do have to be.
I guess the tricky thing about that question is, when do you know you're at the top of the market? Do you know what I mean? When do you know you are?
You never know, but the thing is that like the markets run in cycles. So if you've had like 3, 4, 5 years of upward growth, then there's a good chance that you're coming near the top of the market. Now it could go on for another 2 years or something. And I'm not saying that you just completely put down tools and everything, but you've just got to look at deals in a far more kind of careful way. You sort of, whenever I did a deal, I would have 3 outcomes, potential outcomes. One would be, spectacular outcome. That's when everything goes exactly as according to plan. But then you've got to have the other one is, okay, what happens if the market's fallen and we're looking at a 25% fall in the revenues that we were expecting? What's that look like? How will that affect the costings and stuff? And if you do those sums, you start to kind of say to yourself, you know what, maybe I'm being over cautious, but I'm going to pass on this deal. And you'll never go broke passing on a deal. You'll go broke piling into deals and borrowing money on the back of it just when the market turns.
That's a really good point, actually. I think a lot of people, they've got this kind of this mindset of, you should only have a plan A, you shouldn't have a plan B or C or whatever, because otherwise you might fail. You're distracting yourself from your plan A. I totally disagree with that. For me, it's like, you obviously do as much as you can to have the inspiration and the drive and the accountability to tackle a plan A and see that as your priority. But having a plan B and C and D as just contingencies is sensible. Do you know what I mean? A lot of people.
At the end of the day, the market, you have no control. I call the 3 things that will take you down are the 3 E's: economy, ego, emotion. Those 3 things. And there's, you can control 2 of them, but the third one, the economy, you just cannot control that. But your ego tends to run away with you when you're having success. A couple of years of success, a couple of years of you winning everything that you touch does an awful thing to the brain, and it just tells you like that you deserve all of this, you've done all of this. The market the market rises and lifts all boats, but for some reason you think that you're special and that you're the person who did this and that you're responsible for all of this success. And that's something to remember. Emotional, like what I mentioned about when the prices are falling and all that kind of stuff, and you get emotionally tied to a price and stuff, that will kill you, because you'll think to yourself, I'm not taking that offer. That's like paltry. And the reality is that might be the highest offer you will ever get for that property, So you got to be very careful, and you got to kind of think things through. And then the economy is it'll do whatever it's going to do, and you have no choice in that. I see a question there. How did I develop my confidence to become a speaker? That is something that actually I don't mind answering, because I joined Toastmasters International, and it's something that I didn't really know much about, but there's a chapter here in this business park that I run, and I went in to kind of join in one day, and I can remember kind of thinking, I see people are talking and stuff like that, and I joined up as a member. I kept on going up, turning up every second week in my case, and every second week I would turn up and I would just get a little bit more confident, and then I got to the point where I was actually writing a speech half an hour before I had to give the speech, and it got to the point where I sort of felt like I can actually do this anywhere. So I've actually started now speaking in conferences and things like that, and it doesn't I don't bat an eyelid, just get up on the stage and just shoot off, and I put it all down to just baby steps in somewhere like Toastmasters, where every second week I'm exposed to a little bit more, speaking in front of people, and just you're developing the skills and stuff like that.
Just muscle memory, being in that uncomfortable situation repeatedly, and
makes it comfortable.
Something I always say is, you can get used to anything.
Yeah, it's
whether
true.
being in a boxing ring, being on the edge of a cliff, or being public speaking, whatever it is on the stage, you can just get used to anything that you find uncomfortable, no matter how extreme that is, if you do enough of it, right?
Yeah, it's so true. And it's what they say about, I can't remember the name, but the treatment for people who have phobias, spider phobias and things like that. And it's the same. In fact, glossophobia is the fear of public speaking. And
Really?
glossophobia is a larger number of people suffer from glossophobia than do arachnophobia.
What I've heard as well is that the fear of social rejection is a stronger, more powerful fear than death.
Yeah.
And I think that actually goes back to cavewoman days, where if you get rejected by the tribe,
yeah, you're right, you're on.
You can't continue your family. You're like, that's you done.
Yeah,
you don't exist. So it's like it's worse than death because of that. And so
there's some great books out there about, I think there's one called Influence, and I'm trying to remember the name of the author, but it's a book, and all of that stuff comes into it. And what they've found is that it's these kind of inbuilt things that we have inside our DNA. It's like a cognitive biases, and we don't even realize that we are making these decisions based on these biases. And they, like top marketers, use that to influence your decision making. And he writes, this whole book is all about, how people take advantage of these things. And, for example, they found that whenever, I think it was Hare Krishna or something like that, and they used to come up and give you a flower. And prior to them learning to give people a flower, they would go up and ask for money, and they would just be told to get lost. But they found that if you give somebody something, there's a feeling like that you have to reciprocate in some way. And so you've got the flower, and now you feel like you have to put your hand in your pocket and give this guy something because you've now received something. There's all of this kind of, it's going on behind your brain, in your subconscious. You have no idea, but these guys have figured it all out, and they're using it. And it's the same with social media. It's how the social media companies have got us all kind of hooked.
Yeah, no, it's so true. Brilliant. Wow, tons of amazing advice here. And I think you guys would all agree, listening to this, if you're going through a difficult time, just listening to Gavin's advice and experience, with overcoming, huge adversity, going through a huge recession, and having that, resilience through recession, just, really, really inspiring to listen to. Brilliant advice. I love what you said about, you gave us advice looking at the economy like a wheel. You gave us advice from the bottom of the wheel and the top of the wheel. From the bottom of the wheel, seeing it when you really feel like you've lost everything, seeing it as a moment in time, the fact that failure doesn't define you, and seeing cutting back your expenses like a lightening of the load. I thought that was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. Plenty of painful lessons along the way, but the reality is that it's when you fail, that's actually the biggest learning, is when you fail.
Yeah.
When you fail. And if you just apply that if you just take that as a kind of a bit of wisdom, and say to yourself, you know what, this is life. And I was in a high risk, high reward business, and you do not get out of a high risk, high reward business without having some sort of moment when it all kind of goes pear-shaped on you. And the reality is most people, after a couple of years, they bounce back. They may, be a little bit more cautious coming back, and they'll certainly be a little bit more disciplined with their spending and things like that. But that's basically it,
Totally. And what was the 3 E's? Was ego, economy, emotion?
3 E's. Yeah, your ego, your emomes, and the economy. And you have you 2 out of 3 you can control, but the vast majority of the economy will just come out of nowhere, and nobody has any control. And each time I saw it, the .com crash back in 2000. That was something that none of us kind of saw. There was people, selling shares in companies that were like 6 months old, and they were becoming billionaires and stuff like that. And of course, then there was the real estate bubble that built up in 2008. And I can remember looking back, looking at magazines, and there was guys driving Lamborghinis, and they're kind of like saying, oh yeah, I've bought 14 properties in this estate, and they'd he's saying like, oh, I've forgotten which is the other property, is this the one I own, and all this. And I can remember thinking like a lot of people be impressed by that, and the likes of, there's guys like Grant Cardone and all that people are kind of impressed with. But the reality is they're kind of pumping it up, and they're kind of like, look at me, look at all the wealth and stuff, and they're not giving people the kind of the warning that, hold on a second, this could all turn very, very quickly, and you guys are kind of like pumping it up. And of course, there's a ruthless aspect, a ruthless salesman aspect to what a lot of these kind of so-called gurus do. It's
a mix between property business and show business.
Yeah, I mean, and like once you realize it's the show business, it's the same with Donald Trump. So many people don't realize, like, he would go on like, for example, as soon as somebody goes on the likes of The Apprentice or a show like that, like that usually is a sign that they're actually past their sell-by date, because like anyone whose business is doing well wouldn't be bothered going to do a show like that. Do you know what I mean? And in his case, he's flying in helicopters, and he's standing on the top of these buildings that are, this building I built for 800 million, and today it's worth $1 billion, and all this. I know some of the guys that are in New York, and some of those buildings, like, he doesn't own even 1% of the building. His name is on the front door, and that is it. And he got paid a fee for that name. And but written in the deep in the contract is that he's allowed to use, he's allowed to say that he owns the building as part of his whole marketing kind of thing. And when you start to dig in, and you also see, these posts of guys in private jets, and you realize that you can actually go down to the airport and you can pay like, $100 or something like that to stand on the steps of the private jet, like, and take some photos inside and selfies and stuff. I mean, and so like that is what you're, you don't have the lifestyle, but you're trying to portray this thing.
This seems like the perfect way to lead onto your podcast, really, behind the facade. It just sums it up perfectly.
Maybe we can put a link somewhere for somebody. But
what I'll do in the group and on YouTube is I'll paste a link to Gavin's podcast. If you're really into property or even just mindset around this stuff, and you enjoyed today, you'll find that really fascinating. Yeah, and if you want to check out anything more on me, I have a website, gavinjgallagher.com, and you'll find a lot of different things in there for me. Absolutely amazing, Gavin. Been an absolute pleasure finally getting you on to chat through this stuff. Sorry I kept you so long. We could keep on talking another 20 minutes probably. Yeah, we could. Yeah, I could tell you some more stories, but we'll have to do a part 2. No problem. Anytime, Sebastian. Good to see you. All right, mate. Yeah, brilliant to see you. Thank you so much for coming on, mate. Take care. Take care.